she said, "they took off all my clothes." But the rancher replied, "You're coming with me." The sun was beating down on the cracked plains, on the bruised and torn fabric of her dress, on the raw, scraped skin of her shoulders. Her world had been reduced to this: the blinding glare, the sharp scent of sagebrush, and the memory of guttural laughter that still echoed in her skull, a ghost of a sound that had ripped her voice from her throat. Her own words, when they had come, had been a dry whisper, a single sentence offered to the vast, indifferent sky before he arrived. "They took off all my clothes," a confession of absolute violation, spoken to no one. But he had heard. He had been tracking a stray steer and had seen the buzzard circling, a dark premonition in the blue emptiness. He saw not a stray calf, but the wreckage of a human soul. He dismounted his horse, his movements economical and sure, the leather of his saddle creaking in the profound silence. He stood over her, his shadow a momentary mercy from the sun. He was a tall man, built of the land itself, all weathered plains and quiet strength. He did not offer a gentle hand or soft platitudes. He simply stated the future as he saw it, a future that would begin now, with this singular, unyielding command. He brought her to a place where the world ended and his life began. The ranch was nestled in a shallow valley, a fortress of solitude defended by mesas the color of rust and a sky that was too big, too empty for malice to hide in. The house was made of thick timber and river stone, its windows like watchful eyes. It was a structure built not for comfort, but for endurance. For her, it was another cage, but the door was unlocked. He led her horse into the corral and then guided her, not by touch, but by a slight, almost imperceptible nod of his head, toward the porch. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of wood smoke and dried lavender. He pointed to a room. "Yours," he said. It was the only word he spoke for 3 days. In the room was a simple bed with a thick quilt, a wash basin with a pitcher of clean water, and a small wooden chair. He left a plate of food, stew and hard bread, on the floor outside her door that first evening, and then again the next morning, and the next. He never knocked. He never tried the handle. He simply provided, his actions a form of communication more fundamental than speech. She remained in the room, a ghost haunting a space she did not know, listening to the sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood, the soft whinny of a horse. These were sounds of life, of order, of a world that continued to turn despite the fact that hers had stopped. She was voiceless, stripped not just of her clothes, but of her name, her past, her very sense of self. She was a wound, and this silent, formidable man was the clean, stark bandage, applied without sentiment, but with an unnerving, absolute competence. His name was Arthur, though she did not know it. He moved with the deliberate pace of a man who understands that haste is the enemy of purpose. Every morning, before the sun had fully breached the horizon, he would be out, mending the endless lines of barbed wire that defined his domain. His hands, calloused and sure, would work the pliers, twisting the metal with a practiced efficiency that was almost hypnotic to watch from her window. He was a creature of routine, and his predictability began to weave a fragile net of safety around her shattered nerves. The sun rose, he worked. The sun set, he returned. Food would appear. The silence would hold. He asked nothing of her. He did not look at her with pity, or curiosity, or desire. When his eyes did pass over her, it was with the same calm, assessing gaze he gave his livestock or the distant weather patterns, a simple acknowledgement of a thing that existed within his sphere. One afternoon, he came inside and placed a small, splintered wooden box on the main room table. It was a music box, its lid cracked and its delicate ballerina snapped at the ankle. He did not say why it was there. He simply left it, a broken thing in the center of their quiet world. For days, she would only look at it from her doorway. It was like her, a vessel of potential music, now silenced and fractured. Then, 1 week after her arrival, she crept from her room. Her hand, trembling like a leaf in a phantom wind, reached out and gently touched the splintered wood. It was the first object she had willingly made contact with. Arthur saw the gesture from across the room, where he was cleaning a rifle. He did not speak. He did not move. He simply watched, his stillness a form of permission, a silent observation that understood the immense weight of that single, tentative touch. The small, purposeful act of touching the broken music box became a fissure in the dam of her paralysis. A tiny crack through which agency began to seep. The next day, she emerged from her room not just to eat, but to observe. She watched him patch a worn saddle blanket, his needle large and clumsy in his powerful hands, but his stitches were even and strong. He was mending. He was always mending. The fences, the tack, the leather of his own boots. His entire existence seemed to be an act of quiet restoration. That evening, after he was asleep, she took the blanket and, using a small sewing kit she'd found in a drawer, she unpicked his rough stitches and replaced them with a fine, nearly invisible seam. She left it folded on the chair he always used. When he saw it the next morning, his routine paused for a full minute. He ran a thumb over the delicate stitchwork, his expression unreadable. He looked toward her closed door, and for the first time, she felt seen not as a victim, but as a contributor. It was a transaction without words. Her skill for his safety. Her quiet labor for his silent protection. From there, her world expanded from the four walls of her room to the corners of the house. She began to sweep the floors, her movement slow and methodical, the whisk of the broom a soothing, rhythmic sound. She washed the dishes he left in the basin, the warm water a comfort to her hands. These were not chores forced upon her, they were tasks she claimed, anchors in the chaotic sea of her trauma. Each swept floor, each clean plate, was a reclamation. She was remaking a home, and in doing so, she was remaking a self. Arthur accepted her contributions with the same quiet gravity with which he did everything. He would simply find the tasks done, and he would nod to himself, a silent affirmation of the new, unspoken partnership that was taking root in the fertile soil of their shared silence. Slowly, the silence between them changed its nature. It had begun as a chasm of trauma and uncertainty, a void she could not cross and he would not breach. Now, it was becoming a shared space, a comfortable quietude woven from mutual respect and the steady rhythm of their days. The house, once a mere shelter, began to feel like a sanctuary. Afternoons were spent on the wide porch. He would sit in his chair, oiling a harness or sharpening a blade, the scrape of steel on stone a meditative sound. She would sit on the steps, mending a shirt or simply watching the vast landscape. The western sky, a canvas of brutal sun and impossible blues, no longer felt threatening. It was just a part of their world, as much as the solid wood of the porch beneath her. They existed in parallel, their paths rarely crossing but their presence a constant, reassuring weight to the other. He was the mountain, unmoving and permanent. She was the wild grass at its base, slowly regrowing after a fire, finding strength in the mountain's shadow. She learned his language, a dialect of gestures. A slight dip of his chin was approval. A hand run over the back of his neck was weariness. A long, steady gaze toward the horizon was contemplation. He, in turn, learned hers. The way she held her hands clasped in her lap meant she was at peace. A slight tensing of her shoulders was a memory intruding. A focus on her mending was her way of centering herself. They were two solitary creatures who had found a way to be alone together, and in that shared solitude, a profound and unspoken bond was being forged. The world outside, with its cruel men and its chaotic violence, seemed a distant, half-forgotten dream. Here, in this valley, the only laws were the changing of the seasons and the quiet covenant between them. Months bled into a year. The harsh winter snows melted into a riot of spring wildflowers, which in turn surrendered to the heat of a long, dry summer. Her hair, once matted and grim, had grown long and was the color of wheat. The haunted, vacant look in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet watchfulness. She was no longer a ghost, she was a presence. She had painstakingly glued the broken ballerina back onto her metal peg and sanded the cracked lid of the music box. It was still fragile, still scarred, but it was whole. She had yet to try and wind it. She was not ready for the music. One evening, a storm was gathering on the horizon, the clouds a bruise of purple and grey against the setting sun. The air grew heavy, charged with a restless energy. Arthur stood on the porch, watching the approaching squall line, his face a mask of concentration as he read the sky. She came to stand near the railing, a few feet away, her own eyes on the churning clouds. The wind whipped a strand of her hair across her face. It was the first time a natural force had felt like anything other than a threat. This was different. It was a power, but it was not malice. It was just the world breathing. He turned his head slightly, acknowledging her presence. He opened his mouth as if to say something about the storm, a warning perhaps, but he stopped. It was then, in the charged air before the rain, that she spoke her first word to him. Lena, it was not an answer to a question. It was a statement. A gift. Her name. She was giving it to him, and in doing so, taking it back for herself. Arthur's eyes met hers, and the wind seemed to hold its breath. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Arthur, he replied. The names hung in the air between them, simple and solid, two cornerstones laid for a foundation that had already been built. Then the first drops of rain began to fall. The peace they had cultivated was a fragile thing, a garden grown in a harsh and unforgiving wilderness. And the wilderness always remembers. They came back in the autumn, three riders silhouetted against a blood-orange sunset. It was them. Lena knew it before she could properly see their faces. She felt it in the sudden ice that flooded her veins, a cold memory that the warmth of the past year could not entirely banish. The leader, a man named Brandt, had a swagger that was an insult to the quiet dignity of the land. They were laughing, the sound coarse and ugly, a stark violation of the valley's tranquility. They had been chasing a lost herd and had stumbled upon the ranch, a discovery of an oasis they felt entitled to claim. Arthur had been splitting the last of the winter wood, the axe rising and falling with its usual steady rhythm. He stopped mid-swing, his head rising slowly, like a wolf scenting danger on the wind. He saw them, and every line of his body went rigid. He did not run for his rifle. He did not shout a warning. He simply stood, the axe held loosely in one hand, his body a silent challenge. Lena, who had been on the porch, froze. The terror was a physical thing, a hand closing around her throat. For a moment, she was back in the dust, the sun beating down, the laughter echoing. But then she looked at Arthur. He was not looking at her. His entire focus was on the approaching threat, his presence a living wall between her and them. He had not built this sanctuary for it to be broken. That knowledge, that certainty in his stance, was an anchor. The fear was still there, but it no longer owned her. She went back inside the house, her movement stiff but deliberate. Brandt and his men reined in their horses a few yards from the woodpile, their casual arrogance poisoning the air. Well now, Brandt drawled, his eye sweeping over the well-kept ranch, a predator assessing territory. Looks like someone's been keeping cozy out here. He dismounted, his spurs jingling a discordant tune. He looked at Arthur, a dismissive smirk on his face. We'll be nadin' a water for our horses. And a hot meal. And we'll be staying the night. It was a declaration of dominance, the assumption of power that defined his entire existence. Arthur didn't move. He just watched them, his silence more powerful than any shouted threat. His stillness was unnerving. It was the absolute calm at the center of a storm. Brandt's smirk faltered slightly. He gestured with his chin toward the house. You alone out here, old man? Just then, the door of the house opened. Lena stepped out onto the porch. She was not the broken creature they had left for dead. She was dressed in a simple, clean dress, her hair was tied back, and her face, though pale, was composed. She held Arthur's rifle. She did not aim it. She held it across her body, presenting it. Her eyes met Brandt's, and there was no fear in them. Only a cold, hard finality. Brandt's jaw dropped. He recognized her. The shock on his face was mingled with a flicker of fear, and then a renewed, ugly anger. You, he snarled. Lena said nothing. She walked down the porch steps and stood beside Arthur, a partner in the coming confrontation. She offered him the rifle. Her hands were perfectly steady. It was an act of profound trust and shared purpose. He took the weapon from her without looking away from Brant, the transfer seamless, an extension of their unified will. The battle line had been drawn not in the dirt, but in that single, silent exchange. The storm that had been brewing internally for over a year finally broke. It was not loud, nor was it glorious. It was a grim, necessary act, as swift and decisive as a hawk taking its prey. Arthur's movements were fluid and certain, the rifle in his hands an extension of his will. The arrogance of Brant and his men shattered against the rock of Arthur's unyielding resolve and Lena's silent defiance. The confrontation was over almost as soon as it began, the loud, ugly chaos of it a brief, jarring note that quickly faded, leaving behind a silence that was deeper and more profound than any that had come before. The valley reclaimed its peace, swallowing the echoes of violence as if they had never been. Lena did not watch. As Arthur moved to face the threat, she had turned and gone back into the house, her part in the stand complete. She had not been a damsel to be rescued, she had been a soldier delivering a weapon to her commander. Now, she waited. When Arthur returned, he was grim, but his hands were steady. He leaned the rifle against the wall and washed his hands in the basin, the water turning a faint pink before he threw it out into the dust. He said nothing of what had happened. There was no need. The ghosts had been exorcised. That evening, as the last light of dusk painted the mesas in soft shades of purple, he sat on the porch. Lena came out and, for the first time, sat in the chair beside him, not on the steps below. She carried the mended music box. Her fingers, with a newfound confidence, found the winding key. She turned it. A delicate, tinny melody filled the quiet air, a simple, hopeful tune that had been silent for years. It was fragile, imperfect, but it was music. They sat together, side by side, listening as the song played out, the final notes hanging in the twilight. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of peace, of a future that was finally their own. And so their story finds its peace in the vast quiet of the West. But what do we take from a tale woven more from silence than from words? What do we learn from a man who speaks in mended fences and a woman who finds her voice in a needle and thread? We learn that safety is not a promise whispered in the dark, but a wall built brick by brick, day by day. It is the predictability of a meal left by a door. It is the steady, rhythmic sound of an axe that says, "I am here. I am constant." You are secure. We learn that healing is not a sudden miracle, but a slow, quiet process of reclamation. It is the courage to touch a broken thing, to sweep a floor, to mend a tear, to claim a small piece of the world as your own and set it right. It is the bravery in speaking your own name aloud, not as a plea, but as a declaration. Arthur and Lena teach us that the most profound connections are often forged in the spaces between words. Theirs was a language of shared presence, of mutual respect built on action, not articulation. He did not save her with vows or grand speeches. He saved her by creating a space where she could save herself. He was the harbor, and she was the ship, battered and broken, who learned to mend her own sails and navigate her own course within the safety of his shores. Theirs is a quiet parable for a loud and chaotic world. It reminds us that true strength is not the power to dominate, but the discipline to protect. It is the integrity to stand for what is right, without needing an audience. It is the patience to wait for a wounded soul to heal on its own timeline, offering nothing but unwavering, silent support. Look around you. Who in your life is living in the eye of a silent storm? Who has had their voice stolen by the cruelty of the world? Perhaps the help they need isn't advice, or platitudes, or promises. Perhaps all they need is a safe harbor. A quiet presence. A task to be done. You don't need grand speeches to change a life. Be the person who shows up, day after day. Be the one whose actions are so consistent, they become a source of strength for others. Mend the fence. Clean the rifle. Offer the silent acknowledgement that says, "I see you. I respect your struggle. And I will stand here, with you, for as long as it takes, because sometimes, the most powerful and transformative love in the world isn't spoken at all. It's built."